I earn a living. This shark, swallow you whole. I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. Find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. $10,000 for me by myself. For that you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Mr. Vaughn, I pulled a tooth the size of a shot glass out of the wreck hull of the boat out there, and it was the tooth of a great white.
A what?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Love to prove that, wouldn't you? Get your name into the National Geographic.
No, I'm not saying that this is not the shark. It probably is, Martin. It probably is. It's a man-eater. It's extremely rare for these waters. But the fact is that the bite radius on this animal is different than the wounds on the victim.
Get out of that boat!
Well, this is not a boat accident. It wasn't any propeller. It wasn't any coral reef. And it wasn't Jack the Ripper.
It was a shark.
I'll never put on that ice jacket again.
Welcome to the Jaws Obsession for an epic 50th global broadcast. As always, we are here to share with you, prove to you, convince you, or just to remind you that Jaws is the greatest movie of all time. This episode will not disappoint. For those of you who gather here to learn a few details about Jaws that maybe you may have overlooked or maybe never were made aware of, I can guarantee you over the next hour, even if you are the most diehard of Jaws fanatics that has followed the movie since 1975 when it appeared on screens, I promise you, you will learn something from our very special guest today. It is only fitting on the 50th episode of the Jaws Obsession to feature a special guest that was not only involved in the making of the greatest movie of all time, but one of the unsung heroes of the production, in my opinion. We pride ourselves here at the Jaws Obsession on finding the little details that might be looked over, and when highlighted, that sheds new lights into the Jaws universe. Some of the bigger names of the Jaws production are well known. We know that Spielberg, John Williams, Dreyfuss, Joe Alves, Zanuck and Brown, but Jaws was only a successful motion picture due to contributions by many different crew members and normal working class folks who, in the summer of 1974, they pitched in and helped a Hollywood production survive a nightmare scenario. Right now, on the Jaws Obsession, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome to the show a man who was critical to the set of Jaws during its production, Mr. Marty Milner. Marty, thanks for jumping in here with us on episode 50. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Ryan. How about yourself?
I'm great, and I am so excited for this interview. Thank you very much for coming on.
Sure.
Marty, I understand you grew up your summers on Cape Cod. You were from Massachusetts, then moving to Martha's Vineyard in the early 70s. Where you would live for 20 years. What was life like on Martha's Vineyard before the arrival of the Jaws production?
In 1973, 74, I had been on the island since I graduated from college in 1970. And I had worked mostly as a carpenter and as a laborer. And eventually I got to know home construction very well. So the island at that time pretty much was closed down, I would say 9 months of the year. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of a difficult place to earn a living. I first moved to Oak Bluffs and lived there for a number of years. Then I ended up buying a small piece of land and I built a little house and was just working in the local construction carpentry business with residential construction. So I knew carpentry pretty well, all the way from framing to finished carpentry.
And that's the skill that you were a carpenter by trade. So,
yes.
So take us back to the spring of 1974. I understand it's around March. You're in a local bar in Edgartown with your friend Bob. and jobs are scarce. Everyone's living off of money from the previous season. And then two guys walk in looking for a commitment. What happened there?
Part of my existence at that point was I was really into tools, and I was interested in learning all the different tools that you needed in order to earn a living in the carpentry trade. So through the whole Earth catalog and a place called Silvo Tools in Philadelphia, I believe, I was always ordering every single tool you could think of. So I had a lot of tools that I carried around in my truck. I had a mechanic's body truck, which is one of those pickup trucks with all the doors on the side.
Sure. Yep.
A lot of different tradesmen use that, and I had all these different kinds of tools, and that's one of the ways I stayed employed. Is that everybody knew I could do a lot of different things because I had all this stuff in my truck. Every single Thursday night, most of the people who work for the living met at the Square Rigger in Eggertown, which was the local bar. Workers would meet Thursday night. The people from the Vineyard Gazette, different carpenters, plumbers, electricians, landscapers, waitresses, cooks. Everybody would meet on Thursday night and have a couple of beers and then go home. It was a way to network and to find out where work might be available and where you might be able to. It was kind of like a community gathering place, a place to unwind every week.
Yes.
So these two guys came up to me and they said, "Hey, that guy over there said that you are a carpenter." And I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "We're looking for somebody that might be able to help us do some carpentry this coming summer. And we want to know if we could talk to you about that." And Bobby and I looked at him and said, "Yeah, sure, we'll talk to you." So we sat down. I think they bought us a couple of beers, and they were saying, well, we're going to be filming a movie, and we need some people to who know the local people and who could make a commitment to work for us for the entire duration of the shoot. And would you be interested in doing that? We need, a foreman to run the thing. So I talked to mostly Ward and Jim Wood about my background, and they asked me a few technical questions, which I was able to answer easily because I was reading constantly about carpentry, and in particular about theater construction and set construction and prefabrication.
So this is Jim Wood. This is Jim Wood and Ward Welton that you're talking to.
Yeah, apparently the island had already been scouted, and they had made the decision to go to the island. So they sent these guys to put the beginning of the crew together. Were they associate producers? What were their roles on this? In the organizational chart, there's about 9 to 15 different trees in the organizational chart, and all these people at the top and all these people at the bottom.
Yep.
And there's a title called construction coordinator. And I think Jim Woods was technically a construction coordinator, and Ward, I believe, was the painter. Although those roles were meaningless after we got going.
Sure.
Underneath them was the union people, and then underneath them were local hire laborers.
Right.
So they made me foreman of the local hire construction. So I wasn't even on the organizational chart, nor am I mentioned in the credits to the movie, nor should I be.
Well, the credits in JAWS are very limited, and you have to go to the Internet Movie Database to get
they have to be because of the agreements that they have with the unions and different guilds.
Right.
They're very careful with who they give credit to and why. So I never expected to get any credit for it. I was just a guy who had a lot of tools, who knew what to do. I knew how to take orders, and I knew how to give orders, and I could make things happen.
You were the first local tradesman hired by the production, then, in
that I knew of, because they had to put those people together pretty quickly and have some flexibility. The beach scene was in June.
Right.
We were talking in March.
Yeah.
That only gives us April and May to build those sets, including the 2 boats.
Your official title was construction foreman for set construction of open hires, correct?
For local hire, not open hires.
Open hire. Okay, local hires. Okay.
The local hire is a category.
Local
hires.
Like
casual labor, local hire. It's and I was basically the foreman of the construction crew.
Oh, this is fantastic.
That handled all the local hire people. Now, there were union carpenters and stuff that did a bunch of other stuff.
Yep.
Just like there were gaffers and grips.
Sure.
And that's the formal crew. And those people are well within the organizational chart of the movie in all these different departments. And I was basically, I think it went like Spielberg to Joe Alves to Ward Welton, and then from Ward to me.
Right.
So
wow, this is fantastic.
Ward had a bunch of other people that he communicated with directly, including Joe Alves, because Ward and Joe had worked before as the art director, and I met Joe Alves a number of times because I had to, because he had a lot of stuff to say about how he wanted things to look. And working with Ward knew how to do the colors. He knew how to do the construction.
Mm-hmm.
He knew how to make things look old. He had a lifetime of experience jammed into his toolkit, so he could make virtually anything happen. We got the call sometime, probably April. A handful of us went down to the boathouse in Eggertown and started ordering materials, calling up people, hiring people, talking to people, seeing who we needed for a painter, who we needed for a laborer, who we needed for a carpenter. The storyboard that Joe Alves had was flexible.
Right.
It was there's some open panels there.
Sure.
And he had these blueprints that were basically not real blueprints, but they were close enough so that we could conceive what he wanted to have built. And then we would try a few different materials and put things together and see which would number one be most economical and what could also be painted and assembled so that it looked like what Joe Alves wanted, because that was important, because Joe Alves was working with Spielberg. It would all come all the way down to execution after all these other people had done it, and then we had to make something that would be close enough so that the camera could pick up what it was that they wanted.
What would you say, how many workers did you have underneath you at the height?
Between 40 and 60.
Wow, 40 and 60.
You have to remember, they were building Quint's house at the same time, too.
Yes.
And we prefabbed some of the cuts down in Eggertown and sent them up. And then Bobby was running that crew, and I would go up there and see what they needed. And
that's how fortunate we are here on the Jaws Obsession. I need to remind the listeners that we have someone here, Miss Marty Milner. Marty this is how we are now inside the production. You can't get any closer than this, and how fortunate we are decades later to have this type of insight. So I want to jump in, Marty, if I can, with
sure.
I have 6 major production projects that you were a part of, and I'd like to go through each one.
Sure.
And I'm not worried about time. This is of the 50th episode, so we're going to have a lot of fun here learning from you. Number 1, the Amity Beach Boardwalk, the hot dog stand, band gazebo, and the striped cabanas. Yeah. You built those off-site and then assembled them on the beach, correct?
Yes.
I think some of the people, when you watch Jaws, especially, when I was younger, you think that that's just what it looks like out there. But that was an entire set that was brought to the beach and assembled to make it look.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was a lot of work. And I just remember seeing some of the behind the scenes photos of that.
You see, it's a multitasking thing,
right?
Because this is an organically grown project, where you have people trying to build it in their heads creatively and then send the orders down to the people who were the mechanics. In many ways, I was not so much a carpenter as I was a mechanic and a juggler, because there were a lot of moving parts happening simultaneously and a lot of people changing their minds and a lot of chaos. In that realm is people usually walk away from it because they just can't stand the stress.
Right.
But I was in the thick of it from the very beginning, and I just never gave up. We made several idiotic mistakes because we were trying to build it too heavy, or we were trying to build it too light, or it just didn't look right. So we had to junk a lot of efforts because we didn't know what it was until we built it and it was right.
Any little things you can remember? I remember you mentioned you actually had to cut some corners that a carpenter would see, but the viewing public does not. Can you take us into those decisions?
Sure. If you think of it as it's built from the ground up, everything is built from nothing to something.
Okay.
The first thing we did is we needed a boardwalk. So that was 2x6s that were in platforms that 6 people could carry in sections. Okay. So we built all these sections of boardwalk so that people could walk to the cabanas, so they could walk to all the other things on the set. So the first thing we did was we built these boardwalks, and then we scrumbled them. Scrumble is a word that Ward used to indicate the aging process, where you would spray gray or brown or white onto new wood and make it look like old wood. So we built the platform of the beach, and then we built the arcade, and where they had that stupid little video game.
Yes.
The hot dog stand. Those are just framed up 2x4 3/8-inch plywood because they didn't want to pay for 1/2-inch plywood. If you look at the hot dog stand roof, and most of you will never look at the hot dog stand roof because you have no reason to,
right.
You'll see that they're not angled cuts. It's just a drop-on box. So basically, the hot dog stand is probably 2 sections on the long side and 1 section on the short side. Flat stack them, put them on a flatbed, take them out to the beach, get 8 people to carry it from the flatbed to the beach, then carry it along the boardwalk, assemble it. And what we put everything together with, what you would think they would put together with screws, but they weren't. They were put together with staging nails. A staging nail it's called a double-headed nail. It's got 2 heads on it, and basically you can drive it flush. It's not galvanized, and it's a temporary nail. It's for staging. And what you do is you nail these buildings together with a staging nail, and then when you have to take them apart, you just take your hammer and you take the top head of the nail and you just pop that nail right out, and the building comes apart.
Wow.
So the hot dog stand, the arcade stand,
so they
were all put together with staging nails. Yeah. Go ahead.
And then they could be broken down and moved.
And moved. In case, suppose the shoot went too long and we got some bad weather and they had to take it down and put it back up again.
Right.
Everything had to be made so it could be taken down and put back up again. And then a finish coat of paint and then a scrumble was applied so that it looked like it had been there forever.
Wow.
So you would have a new paint job, and then you would immediately ruin the new paint job with the scrumbling so that it looked faded and worn and seagull shit and all that kind of stuff, so that it looked like it had been there for a while.
Oh, that's
now,
fantastic.
The gazebo that had a really idiotic, simple design that looked good on camera from 50 feet, but up close, I wanted to route the edges with either a Roman ogee or just a 45 degree to get a little shadow line in there. But Ward said, don't do that. The camera's never going to see it. We don't want to waste the time.
Wow.
Just leave it square. That looks fine. Now, we put the gazebo together on a level platform in the side yard of Norton and Esterbrook's boathouse, including the turn posts and all the slats and everything else like that. We put that all together, including the 8 sections of the roof, so that it looked right, and then it got approved. Then we took it all apart, and then we waited to get called to the beach scene. If you look at the gazebo in the movie, you'll see there's like a 2-inch gap where we weren't able to get the roof to fully come completely together. I spotted that gap, and I did everything I could to prevent that gap. But because of the angle of the beach and the way we had worked, and also if you look at that gazebo, that's not a structurally sound building by any means. Mm-hmm. That could easily have blown over in the wind.
All that stress just for a few seconds on film too, because the gazebo isn't featured that intensely. It's just a tracking shot, right?
And the cabanas. We took a 2x3, ripped them in half, just started them up, and then covered them with 1/8-inch Masonite. And if you turn Masonite backwards, the other side of Masonite has a corrugated surface that looks a lot like canvas. So we had the 4 sides and the roof. Now, the roof is not in sections. Those roofs were all made as a single unit, and they were stacked up in the boatyard too.
Right. Okay.
And there's a little 2-inch closet dowel sticking out of the top with a little flag on it. So we had the 8 roofs, and then we had all the 4 sides of the cabana, and that was it. Now that's a very slim. That's half of a 2x3.
Sure.
So and then inside the building, I put more plywood gussets so that because they would lean easily I mean, Masonite's not a structural material,
Right?
So
Right.
it's like it had to be gusseted inside.
So those cabanas
But it
actually,
looks-
those were featured in the Alex Kittner beach scene as well as the 4th of July beach scene. So,
Yes.
and also in the background of when they discover the body of Chrissy Watkins, there's cabanas back there. It's almost like you guys, so it was implying that there was more than one beach around Amity.
We had 8 primary cabanas, and I think we had 4 in the hole in case there had been a problem where they needed to have them in multiple locations.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what we did, the whole thing was continuity. It had to be matching. Every single cabana had to be identical. If you look at the cabana, at the top of the cabana, call it the gutter, every one of those has crown molding with a 45 degree that's attached to the roof, not to the walls. And every single stripe on the cabanas is exactly in the same spot on every single one of them, just as though it was fabric. But that's spray painted and then scrumbled.
Okay.
Every one of those cabanas is level and plumb and square. And I know because I did it and I checked it. And I checked again and again and again, because for as long as they were shooting, you know, people are always screwing around, like banging into things, being malicious. There's a lot of just people that are out there, and they just do whatever they do. And your job is to make sure that whatever they do, you fix it so that it's back where it should be. Because everybody's trying to make their little mark that they can say they screwed that up and see it's still there.
Wow.
So it's like there was a lot of that. A lot of that was going on. If you're a carpenter, you know what level, plumb, and square is, and you can sense. You have an intuitive sense if something has moved out of line. And the camera would see it, but I had to see it before the camera saw it.
Sure, that's why that's why I believe your impact on Jaws is so amazing, because your hard work is the result is we don't see your work. You know, that's the thing is that you make it look flawless.
A good carpenter is not somebody who doesn't make mistakes. It's somebody whose mistakes you can't see.
There you go. Isn't that how life is, right? You just try to fail a little less, right? But and so I thought that's interesting. You're saying the structure was not sound. Now, if we can lateral that over to the Welcome to Amity Island billboard, that was made to only last a few days. You assembled it, and
basically that's a 2x4 square or rectangle covered with plywood that's made in 2 sections. And then there are these, call it moldings, to frame it.
All right.
That's just square wood that's made into call it a cornice.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that was put on 2 sections and put onto a flatbed truck and then carried up to Aquina. The phone company put in the telephone poles in this field right at Aquina Lighthouse. Right. There's a little turnaround there. And they put the poles in, and then we attached the structure, and then there's a little catwalk you can see that's just made out of 2x4s that are scrumbled.
Yeah.
That is pretty shoddy little construction on the catwalk. Mounted it to the poles. We had to fiddle around with it forever, and you can see the joint in the middle of the billboard. It's visible, but it's not too visible. It's just there.
Now, so you were there for the assembly then, right? You were there for that assembly, and they assembled it with the unvandalized billboard image.
Yes.
Right. So they filmed.
It was a blank billboard.
A blank billboard
when we put it up.
Okay.
And then I wasn't up there when they had this thing. Like a billboard screen, exactly to those dimensions that got delivered. I think it was made in California.
Yep.
And then they attached that to the face of the billboard after we were done doing the best we could.
I see.
And then they vandalized it from there.
And then so they did the drive-by with Chief Brody's vehicle.
Yeah.
With it unvandalized. Then they vandalize it. They do the scene with the mayor and Chief Brody and Hooper.
Yeah.
And then you have to go in and break that down?
Yes, and then it goes straight to the dump.
Straight to the dump. Unbelievable.
Well, it's like we got no place. There's no use for it.
Right.
And it's done.
Right.
So it just goes straight to the dump. A great friend of mine that I made on the movie named Nat Bookman, who was a teamster from New Bedford, and Nat was the guy who drove the flatbed. Now, there were two gangs of Teamsters, one from Boston and one from New Bedford. There was only two guys from New Bedford. That was kind of a political plum they tossed to him.
Okay.
Even though New Bedford's closer to Martha's Vineyard than Boston is. But Nate Bookman is the guy who taught me how to do rigger's knots and how to correctly rope down a load so that there'd be no accidents. Nate Bookman was the guy. He was the right man for the right job, who had a very specific skill set, and it didn't matter what we were trucking. He could figure out a way to lash it, how to load it, how to unload it.
Do you see, Marty, that's amazing. You're highlighting, you're highlighting names that I've never heard of. I'm sure many of the listeners have never heard of Nate and his contributions. This is because Jaws, we have to stand back and we have to look at Jaws was, there was so many hands involved in making this movie that we've all grown to love, that it's amazing that you're able to highlight this, and I appreciate this information. I want to move on to the shark cage. The shark cage that Hooper is in, it was built locally by a man named Jim Blaine, correct?
I believe so, yes. Jim Blaine was a local metal worker blacksmith who made a lot of the metal stuff. He got the plans for the tilting metalwork assembly underneath Orca 2
all right,
in the boathouse, and he built that first, and then one of his side jobs was to do the shark cage thing.
The scene where Brody pulls the wrong knot, and the cage comes crashing down, and also during the construction sequence of the cage, you see handwriting and notes on the bars of the cage, on the frame assembly. Would that have been Jim Blaine's handwriting?
It could have been anyone's handwriting. I don't remember seeing that, but the cage itself wasn't that well made. I
Right.
think it might have been aluminum pipe, but it was like standard off-the-shelf pipe. It was put together in I think 6 sections, the top and the bottom, and the 4 sides. It was put together mostly with mending plates. If I remember correctly, if you look at it, there are little mending plates. Those are things you can buy at the hardware store when you want to do a surface connection to any two things.
Okay.
I don't think it was a very serious
it was just
project.
I see. So it was just a copy of maybe the cage that the tailors were using in Australia.
Yes, probably so. And I don't think that they may not have known that it needed to have that big of a role in the movie till they needed to have it.
Right.
Have a big role in the movie.
That's amazing. I love that. I love how Jaws was making itself as it progressed through the production.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it.
That's amazing.
It was literally learning to bake wedding cakes from a bag of flour and a handful of sugar and a bride who's insane.
And then going over to Quint's Fishing Shack, I know you mentioned it earlier that that was another side project that was going on. But I understand there was a tight fist on the budget and building materials for your department to work with. What corners would they have had to cut, and when you were creating the elaborate fishing shack site on Menemsha?
Well, that was done by Bobby.
All right.
He was the lead guy on that. I was, in that respect, I had my hands full in Eggertown with everything else.
Sure.
And Bobby did that, and I was a logistical support, and I also went up and looked at it while it was going on. Basically, that's a balloon frame building, which created the largest amount of space for the least amount of material. And I believe it's board and batten on the outside of the building, and you can literally see through the walls from the inside. It was like slapdash. At the very top of that building, although it's difficult to see it,
yep,
there was a copper shark weather vane that was made by Travis Tuck, and it disappeared at some point just before they took the building down. And I've only heard rumors about what may have happened to it, but somewhere out there's a copper weather vane that was on top of Quint's house.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That Joe Al specifically wanted that weather vane. I tried to find a way to get it before somebody else did, but it was gone before it was gone.
Did they have? Was that a problem? Did things tend to walk off the set?
A lot of things walked off, and there were night watchmen and all kinds of people all the time trying to prevent and mostly they were trying to prevent vandalism.
Sure.
Because that's where they would lose the most amount of money.
Right.
Is if something that we had made that was ready for a shot was damaged or destroyed, it would throw the shoot off. And that's the number they kept saying was it costs $70,000 a day to shoot this, and when we're ready, you need to have your stuff ready.
Right.
And there can't be any excuses. There can't be any problems. There can't be, we need another one. You need to have one in the hole on everything. There's people yelling at you all day long from different directions. Every one of those department heads, they all knew that it's the idiots with the hammer that can screw everything up, and we got to make sure that they know what we want.
Right.
So people were always coming down, and there was this really good guy, Nick Charlanzio, who was the auditor, who was trying to keep track of the money, and he was always coming down and checking, you just took delivery on this. Can you show me where that is? Because he knew how the movie system worked, and a lot of stuff that was delivered never got delivered to the set. Not on that movie, but he kept telling me, he said, I know every trick in the book. And he said, I know that there's going to be problems. So it's like, and if you know anything, you need to tell me, because it's like, this can be huge. It can be really a big problem.
So it can spin out of control, really, right?
Yeah, and he was in charge of the money. So he was the auditor on the movie, and he was very close to Zanuck and Brown, and they were down there frequently enough, keeping an eye on things so they could understand what was happening. One
more question about the fishing shack, just so you can clear this up. Many fans have lamented on the takedown of the set after filming, and because of permit issues and all that. But in your opinion, would that structure wouldn't have passed the test of time if left alone, right? That would eventually have collapsed.
It probably wouldn't have made it to the end of August.
Wow. The first stiff breeze, huh?
It was driven into the ground, and they hung the structure on the poles, and they ran a set of wooden stairs up into the room, put the windows in. I think there were 2 circular windows, one of which we got a decal Joe Wells had made, which was like this yellow stain with crazing on it. And we glued this film to the window so it would look old. I went up there with Ward at one point, and we scrumbled a bunch of areas that just looked too new. You can't have new wood. You can never have new wood show up in any movie scene.
Right.
It's got everything that could possibly show up has to be scrumbled.
Wow, because
it has to be aged.
Because it might not even be center frame on the movie, but subliminally the eye would pick it up. Is that what we're looking at here?
It ruins the willing suspension of disbelief.
Right. Okay.
And that it's like when you see an ancient Chinese movie or something like that, and you see a 2x4, you know they didn't have 2x4s 1,000 years ago.
Right. Yes.
And if you see a new piece of wood in a movie in an old house that's supposed to be this dirty little fisherman's house, it sticks out immediately, and your eye catches it. And it's like at one point there was you probably don't even remember it in the movie, but they're walking through the basement, I think, of his house.
Okay.
And there's a machine there that they use theoretically to chop blubber.
Yep.
And there's a small Orca in the basement. At one point, I got a call at home, and I hadn't gone to work yet, and Ward said, you need to come in early. There was this basically a foam rubber fish that looked like an orca, probably 10, 12 feet long. He said, we need to get this up to Menepsha because they're shooting today, and it needs to be in the basement, and take it up there in your truck, and don't tell anybody you drove it up there because the Teamsters will put a bullet through your head. So I drove my truck to the boathouse. Yes. We dragged and rolled this thing, and then put it on the back of my truck. And then I drove it up as the sun was rising up to Menepsha and got it out of my truck and got out of there before anybody even knew I was there. And then they dragged it inside the building, and they cut a slice into it and painted it red so it looked like it was a fish that was being chopped up for chum.
And that was that is one of those little magical moments in the movie those were one of the clues that I used to process into the history for the Book of Quint.
That is probably 8 seconds on film.
Yeah, with Ellen and Martin just walking through the frame, and it's just right there in the foreground. But without that, Marty, I'm telling you, that's one of the clues. That's one of the things that I used to process the information when I wrote the Book of Quint. And we're going to get to that a little bit later, but I just want you to know that work that you did, just making sure that porpoise replica was on set, that left a stamp that resonated all these years later, even into the writing of the Book of Quint. And we're going to get to more of that later, but that's what we're looking at here. That's how special you were to this production. And I just want to thank you one more time for what you did. It's amazing. It's amazing. Everybody wants to know about the Orca 2. The Orca 2, we haven't done an episode yet on the Orca 2. We're going to. So could you please explain who approached you with the design and the plans for the Orca 2, this replica copy of the Orca that could sink on demand?
I don't know who did the plans on the barrel assembly that went underneath it.
Yeah.
And that was done between, I think, probably Woods and Jim Blaine, and probably Joe Alves, and probably Bob Matty, and maybe Roy Arbogast too, because they were all those mechanical contraption kind of people that had experience in movie sets that made those kinds of things. And it was a pretty simple thing, but it had to be done in a certain way. And essentially it was like probably 6 or 7 racks of probably 3 to 5 55-gallon drums that were all welded together, and then you could trip them. Some of them you could disconnect, and it would lean one way or lean the other. So basically, it was a platform with 55-gallon drums underneath it that could be tripped to let air up. Then what we did is we had the actual boat, the Orca. What we did was we painted the whole boat in motor oil, and then we applied fiberglass and let it set up. Then we peeled the fiberglass off, which even though we painted it with oil, it still tore a lot of the boat paint and some of the actual boat itself off of the boat. And then that had to be repaired and restored so it looked old and scrumbly again. So then we had Orca 1 sitting in the side yard,
right,
and we had the mold of Orca 1 inside the boathouse. Then it was a question of measuring and going in, and that platform was level, square, and plumb. And then we took the shell of the Orca 1 to where the Orca 2 was going to be, and by just using dimensions from the boat, which was right next door, like 50 feet away, we would make that hull and then the rest of the superstructure and everything else, building it all the way up. And then we added the mast. It's a complete reconstruction, an exact duplicate model, boat to boat. You can't tell one from the other. Thing down to me painting seagull shit, so that the seagull shit on Orca 1 is exactly the same spot on Orca 2. And basically, Ward showed me how to do it. You take a little bit of black, you take a little bit of gray, you take a little white, then you twirl the brush a little bit and just pull it down so it looks just like poop had landed and dripped down the edge of the boat. And basically, I actually did the exact same color match on every single of those things that I painted, because Ward said it's really important. It has to be identical. So, and if you look at the top of the mast, there is, I think in your book, you call it the tuna bell. And I've never heard that term used before. Of course, I'm not a fisherman, so there may be such a thing.
Yeah.
But there's a little black round dish at the top of the mast that has no wires going to it. It's just on a bracket. And that actually is a red plastic dish pan that we got from the local hardware store. It's about 6 to 8 inches deep and probably 18 to 20 inches across. What I did is I cut a circle of 3/4 inch plywood and put that at the bottom of it. And then I got another circle and put that at the top of it. And then I filled in the little joint around the where it is, where the plywood plug fits into the top of the dish thing. Finished that off, and then spray painted the whole thing with Krylon black flat. So, and I made 2 of those, and there's a little bolt that comes out of the top of it that was used to attach it to the mast. Nobody ever knew what that was or what it was supposed to be used for. Some people thought it was a light. Some people thought it was radar. I have no idea what it was. I think it was just something to add a visual spot to the top of the mast. And there's some African country, I have the stamps. They did a celebratory thing of Steven Spielberg's 50th birthday or something like that, and they had a different stamp from each one of his movies, and one of them is a stamp from Jaws that has that stupid little dish tub on it.
I always thought it was like a sound making a bell, like if when you're on the lookout and you spot something on the horizon, kind of like what they would do in the old whaling ships.
It's all about imagination.
That's right.
It's all about not seeing the dish tub. If you see a radar and I see a light, and somebody else sees a fish, detector, somebody else sees this, it all adds. And as long as you don't see a dish tub,
there it is,
spray painted flat black, we're good.
Exactly, Hollywood magic right there. This is fantastic. This is fantastic. You're teaching us all the tricks from bird droppings to dish tubs on mast. This is great. Could you please explain, could you elaborate on the 6 breakaway sterns you created for the Orca 2 and also the interior cabin replica that you created for the Brody vs. Shark scene?
They knew they were going to have the shark go through the back of the boat.
Okay.
They weren't exactly sure how they were going to do that, but they knew that had to happen. And that was on Orca 2 because obviously Orca 1 had to be somewhat seaworthy. Orca 2, you could fiddle around with it and it would still float.
Right.
So when we built that, we made that cabin wall breakaway so it could be taken out, put back in again. And again, we used staging nails to hold it in place.
Okay.
I never looked really close at the movie. I don't know if you can actually see them or not. In order to do those shots, they weren't sure what would happen when the shark bashed into it.
Okay.
So Ward, being Ward, he said, we have to get some sugar pine. Sugar pine is basically, it's a softer pine. It's not like a longleaf yellow pine, which you get in the South. It's more like a white pine.
Okay.
This comes from out west. It's clear. There's no knots in it at all. It's almost buttery. It has a really sweet smelling sawdust. And we got like a block of wood made up of 1-inch pieces that were random lengths, anywhere from 3 feet, I think, to like 6 feet.
Okay.
And it was just this block of wood. So we started milling it and building this cabin breakaway wall. We got the same amount of wood in balsa wood. Balsa wood is just a wretched wood to work with. I wouldn't recommend anybody ever use it for anything. The same thing, it's a block of wood all tight together, different random lengths. And then we had to mill that down to like 1-inch thick pieces and then glue it together. Now, balsa wood is not really a sawdust. It's like a fine dust. And it just like coats everything and it gets into your lungs and you're coughing and gagging. It's just a really horrible thing to work with, but it's really light. So
it shatters easily, right? Is that's the method?
You'd think it would, but it actually doesn't because it's so springy.
Okay.
So it bends quite a bit. But what does shatter easily is my glue of choice on most of the things that I did. When I had to do a gusset that made a difference, I always used a little bit of weldwood glue in addition to like the staging nails. If it was going to stay there and didn't have to be disassembled, I used weldwood glue any place I could where I knew I needed structural integrity. Weldwood glue is stronger than any wood. I don't even know if they still make it. It's called Resorcinol glue. It's a water-based thing, and you paint it on, and then you clamp it, and then once it sets up, like 12 to 24 hours later, it's rock hard, and it can withstand almost any impact. The wood will break before the glue breaks.
Interesting.
So putting the balsa wood together with the weldwood glue actually turned into a fairly decent product for smashing with sharks. So the balsa wood stern, there were 3 balsa wood sterns and 3 sugar pine sterns, 3 cabin sidewalls of pine and 3 of balsa wood. I don't know how many sets they actually used.
Okay.
Because that was done out at sea, and I never got to go out to sea because I was the land guy. I was doing stuff that fed the guys out at sea. Although when I worked at Shark City, I worked on the sharks, and I saw the barge and like most of the other stuff, and I built a lot of those rafts that they carried the shark around on, basically styrofoam flotation devices with the shark hanging and then the roof on the top.
Did each of the sterns have the Orca lettering on them?
We made all the letters at the same time. The letters are made out of half-inch Masonite.
Half-inch
Which
Masonite.
It's the last thing you would make a maritime boat letter out of.
Right.
But that Ward said he said, when we're done with this, because we had to special order the half-inch Masonite. You normally can't get half-inch Masonite anywhere.
Right.
But it's a movie thing. And if you look at Masonite, it's got a hard surface and it takes a sharp edge. So it looks like metal.
Wow.
And we made I think at least 12 sets of the Orca letters.
How many sets?
Now, at least 12.
12.
Because we had to have 2 you've got 3 sterns, and you've got the boats, and you've got to have backups in case you need them.
Sure.
And if you're doing the stencil thing, it's only going to take another hour or 2 to make more letters, but having to go back and remake them and have them be exactly the same, you're better off just making extras. It's just going to take somebody a couple of hours to do it.
Yeah.
And then you've got what you need, and it doesn't matter what happens. If you need to throw something together, you got the letters.
Amazing.
So and the same thing was true with the Amity National Bank sign and a couple of other signs that look like bronze. That's Masonite. And we had a bunch of those signs made too, because if they got stolen and we needed to do the shot, what are you going to do? Stop everything and make a new sign? Just make the damn sign.
Right.
Make a bunch of extras. But basically, you take after you get the letters and the frame made, it's a half-inch Masonite and 1/8 inch Masonite, and that gives you the different thicknesses. And basically, you mix lacquer with bronze powder, which is old bronze powder,
right?
And that gives you one color. And then you take lacquer and you mix it with bright bronze powder, and that gives you the bright bronze look. And we made a bunch of things using bronze powder and lacquer for different things in the movie. And I think on the boat, some of the stuff that you're looking at that you think might be bronze is not bronze.
Wow. Wow, fantastic. That's amazing. The Hollywood magic that went into it's way more than I actually expected. What you're revealing here, there's more Hollywood magic that went into Jaws than I expected. I actually thought you guys just ran around to the flea markets or something and grab stuff, but you're actually saying you had to create some of that, a lot of that from scratch, and it looks like the real deal. That's amazing.
And what that is that's Joe Alves and that's Ward Welton, and it's Joe knowing what he wanted artistically and how to set the right tone in terms of material and color, and Ward being able to create it. And if Ward couldn't figure it out or how to make it happen, I would just invent something and we would try it, and if it worked, that's what it was.
Fantastic.
So it's like it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to look right for a couple of seconds.
So let's move on to the final thing. Let's talk about the 3 mechanical sharks used in the movie.
Okay.
Plus one head for the explosive ending, right? Could you please explain the construction materials? This is important because this is going to lead to a very main point that I want to make that's going to lead up to this. Could you please explain the construction materials each shark was made of? Well,
what it was an articulated contraption that was like steel pipes, so it could bend a certain amount. The bending was controlled by a set of tubes that were either pneumatic or hydraulic, and they had to send out at one point to get different sized rams because the ones they had weren't big enough.
Okay.
Because they had a lot of things and then they mounted each of these there's a clamp in the center of the articulated mechanism that clamps to the sea sled below, which is where all the tubes go to and how they articulate the shark, whether it goes up or down and whether or not it like looks cockeyed in the water and all that stuff. So there's this platform with an arm that connects to the shark.
Right.
Then the shark has call it an inner exoskeleton, for lack of a better term. This exoskeleton is attached to about 4 inches of high-density flexible foam. Yeah, like polyurethane foam.
Okay.
It's a very small bubble, very dense foam. I've never seen it anywhere else. It's hard to describe it. It's almost, if you can imagine, a cross between muscle and blubber.
And that's from the mold? That was taken from a mold of the one shark, right? So they all have a similar shape?
Yes. And then that is attached on the inside to the articulated skeleton.
Okay.
Then the outside of the shark is covered with 4-way ripstop nylon, which is a nylon, but like it's stretchy.
Okay.
And you can pull it in 4 or 5 different directions, and it stretches all the time in all those directions. And it's pretty expensive stuff. So that covers the outside, and that's applied with a flexible epoxy. Then I didn't actually make the sharks. I did repair the sharks.
Yes.
But I know how they were made because that's how I had to repair it.
Right.
And Rory Arbogast, who is the guy who did the sharks along with Bob Matty and Joe Alves, but Bob Matty designed the sharks with Joe Alves. Roy Arbogast figured out the materials and how to make it all work in close conjunction with Bob Matty. And then Roy Arbogast showed me how to repair the shark, and Ward added like his expertise with materials so that we could actually fix a broken shark.
The pneumatic rams, the system up for the shark movement, caused tears and damage to the skin and foam. Could you elaborate on what Ward Welton showed you on how to fix the shark because it was taking daily damage? These sharks were taking daily damage in the routine of filming, right?
Well, it's funny. They were taking daily damage, but there also was chronic long-term damage.
Oh.
Basically, that assembly on the articulated mechanism was immersed in water every day and taken out of water. It was a good design, looked beautiful on paper, and it was a beautiful fish on dry land. That's all well and good. As soon as you start to move it a foot or 2 feet or open up the mouth, if there's no stops in the mechanical mechanism, the shell of the fish is going to rip. It's not a design flaw. It's like, who would think to do that?
Right.
Who would think, where do we stop? When will it rip? They didn't have any specs on that because it had never existed before on the face of the planet. So they would try to open the mouth, and they would open the mouth, but the hydraulic ram sometimes would chatter, or the control wasn't specifically or exactly tuned so that it could move slowly. So it would move too fast, and it would tear this big rip on the side of the mouth. So it would look like the shark was actually laughing.
Oh,
and
that's terrible.
Then that would have to be fixed. Meanwhile, the whole time, salt water and microorganisms and everything else that's floating around out in the ocean is getting into the workings of this plastic fish. And essentially, it starts to sag, it starts to droop. Where it's attached to the skeleton might slip a little bit, just like skin slipping off, a little bone. It's like, how do you keep this thing together so that you could finish the movie? They realized they had to repair the thing. Now, in the history of the movie, at that point, we had finished the beach scene, and they basically had to get whatever shark scenes they were going to get, they had to get those to work.
Right.
So I moved from the boathouse in Norton and Esterbrookes in Edgartown over to Shark City, and then I started working on the sharks and also doing a bunch of independent things that needed to be done, plus going back and forth of the boathouse. We were doing a bunch of other side projects for different people too.
Would there be a lot of late nights fixing the shark, doing your patchwork for the next morning for filming?
sometimes I would usually be there between 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then I would work till 4 or 5 o'clock at night. Then I would go grab a sandwich someplace, then go back to the boathouse. Then they deliver the broken fish. Basically, I had to work as long as I had to work to get the thing repaired, and also to have the epoxy dry so that it would work the next morning. And then I had to sit around and wait for that and then finish the repair. So essentially, if you can imagine taking a piece of, if you ever used a piece of insulation board to insulate a house that's like 2 inches thick, and you take a razor knife and you cut into that, imagine that is flexible foam instead. Essentially, I would take the rip and I would take a razor knife and I would cut away anything that was not sound, and basically like a scalpel, and remove any rough flesh. Then I would wipe it down with rubbing alcohol and let it dry. Then I would basically take a series of clamps or any way I could hold that together so that I could see that it would actually come together. Then I'd let it go loose again, and then I would paint the whole wound on both sides with flexible epoxy, then clamp the thing back together again so that the epoxy squeezed out. You wipe that off, and then there's a thing called a hog ring plier. And a hog ring plier basically is a set of pliers where you can take a little half-moon crescent of sharpened wire, and you put it into this plier, and you squeeze it together, and the two prongs come together. It's kind of like a surgical staple.
Okay.
So I would hold the wound together with those surgical staples on the inside and on the outside, and paint that with epoxy. Then I take a pair of after the epoxy sets up, which is usually an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's not fully cured, but it's cured enough. I would then cut the staples and pull the staples out with a pair of pliers. Then I would apply a piece of 4-way ripstop nylon on top of the repaired wound and smooth that down, and then paint that and feather it with some more flexible epoxy and let that dry. Then I take a high-speed pneumatic grinder, which is much faster than an electric one. It really spins, I think, at like 40,000 RPMs.
Okay.
And you can get a real smooth finish really quick. I had a what's called a slick, which is a boat building chisel that's about 2.5, 3 feet long, and they used to use it to like plane rough joints in a boat. And I ground that down with that high-speed grinder. It got it done in nothing flat. But basically, I would grind that down, make it really smooth, the outside of the fish. Then I would hit it with a primer coat, some kind of a waterproof primer. I'm not sure what it was. Ward found it somewhere. That's how Ward basically got the job, because nobody knew how to paint in wet circumstances and have the paint actually stick. But Ward, I think he might have worked on the 10 Commandments or something, but he had a lot of experience with a lot of different things. So he could paint underwater if he had to.
Wow.
So I would do the basic paint job. Then the next morning before it left, Ward and I would do all the little final details on where all the dots went on the fish, and send it off to, and they would get to shoot it like an hour or two later, and basically it was ready to go.
And see,
that happens over and over and over and over again because there were no stops. They eventually put some stops inside of the fish,
right?
But they only opened it as much as they could, figuring out, exactly what they could get away with without tearing the shark again, because it was frustrating for them too.
Sure.
That everybody was trying to find a way to make the fish work, and it just wouldn't work.
It's unbelievable the amount of work that you're detailing here, and I want listeners to realize that this happened day in and day out at some of these sequences. So there was a whole process, and there was a reason why when everyone kind of we all kind of joke about the shark is not working and all sorts of delays, but these were real problems that were happening, and Marty was right there in that if you had a tear, you can't go and keep filming because now you have a continuity error. So that has to be repaired, and then you have to go back and try it again, and that's how difficult this situation was.
And they were rotating the different views, the right, left, and top view of the shark. While they were shooting one of the other two were being repaired, and then they would like send that one back, and then they'd take another one out and slaughter that, bring that one back, and it was just like this rotation of the three bodies.
That's unbelievable. So they really couldn't even shoot in order. He Steven Spielberg or Joel, all the blocking would have to have been, okay, we'll do the left side here because the other one's being repaired, right? So
yeah, they had to think on their feet, assuming that something had to be shot.
Yep.
They had to have something ready, because there's $70,000 a day out the window if they don't have something.
We have a photo of you working. What I'm going to use for the title card of this episode is there's a famous photo of you with the grinder working on one of the mechanical sharks. And that's what you're doing. You're smoothing out a repair, right? Is that what's going on?
Yes.
We see your back.
Absolutely. And it's not just smoothing out a repair. That's a high-speed pneumatic grinder, and that's spinning at probably 40,000 RPMs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a feathered finish that's as smooth as shark skin.
Wow.
And actually, when Ward and I did the finish coat on the shark, we put sand into the paint so it felt like a shark skin.
Oh, that's fantastic. You guys went above and beyond, and that probably also, Marty, translated to the realism for the actors, right? I mean, that they actually could feel this thing right there. It's all, look at it, and the way the water glistens off a rough skin is way different than if it was gleaming and shiny, right?
That's not a smooth shark.
Wow.
That's a sandy shark.
That's amazing.
I guarantee you that is not a smooth skin. And if you ever feel shark skin, I know a lot of fishermen, and I used to catch little dogfish when I lived on the Cape Cod Canal, and I used to catch dogfish out of the canal. And a shark skin is a very specific feel.
That's fantastic that you guys went that extra mile right there. You mentioned that the shark was immersed in salt water and there were organisms and it was getting quite nasty inside. Someone had to go inside to make repairs. But the Hollywood Effects crew members refused their reason. They had reasons and they refused to work on the shark at that point in the production as it wore on. And you were the one that said someone's got to do it, and you went inside to make those repairs.
If you look at any of the pictures from Shark City and you see the boat, the rafts are all berthed with the sharks hanging in them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I had to climb in there. It didn't matter if it was day or night, but somebody had to go in there and like repair the damage that was done to the shark. And it was disgusting. It smelled, if you're familiar with the ocean in New England, it smelled like extreme low tide next to a sewage waste treatment plant. Whoa. It was just like, it was a disgusting, fetid mess that was impossible to clean. It couldn't be sanitized. It just like you cannot sanitize the beach.
Right.
This is like, it's a rotting mess of whatever was in that shark, whatever had been absorbed into all the joints and crevices and possibly the foam of the shark. It just was getting worse and worse and worse. And it actually was pretty disgusting to have to climb in. If you look, you can see I could easily climb in through the mouth because I did. Many times when I was waiting for the wounds to dry, I would climb up inside of the fish and I would find that loose flesh. And I would try to pull it together, and clamp it and like do the epoxy and reinforce it on the inside to try to hold it together,
right,
to give it a little more support to maybe get it to last long enough to happen. But nobody even knew that was happening. I was just doing that because I was there and I was waiting for it to dry. So I may as well do something. We also have to change the teeth on the shark periodically. Sure. And basically there are two kinds of teeth. One is a hard tooth, used for chewing wood or crashing into cabin walls or into the stern, so that if it did happen to catch a tooth on camera, it would actually show it chewing through something. And if somebody's was in the mouth of the shark, or there was any danger of somebody being close to the front of the shark,
Right.
we had to switch it for soft teeth. And the soft teeth were bendable. And again, you could never have a tooth bend on camera.
Right.
So when they needed to switch out the teeth, they needed to switch out the teeth.
So I guess what I'm trying to just zero in on here, and the point is that when the Hollywood, the professionals refused, their stance was, we're not going in there. It's a hazardous situation. And here comes Marty and says, no, we're going to get this done. And that is what I believe is that shows that you are a living embodiment of how working class folk and just normal everyday people came together to make Jaws a successful film. I know there's a lot of we have to give credit where credit's due to the above the line names, the director and the producers and all that. But there's little things that had to happen in order to get those final shots or to actually make everything work. And Marty, I want to just say thank you from all the Jaws fans around the world for what you did at those crucial moments. It was people like you that actually stepped in and said, "Let's do this." Like the Lynn Murphys.
Well, I have to really say that in no way am I a hero of Jaws. I'm just a carpenter guy, and basically I was close friends with Ward, and it was really important to Ward to make this movie work, and out of loyalty to him and my other coworkers, I always did the best I could, but it was just the job. I wasn't and I knew, nobody knew at the time this movie would succeed.
Right.
In fact, when the movie left the island, they had no idea what they had. They did not know,
right,
whether or not it was actually going to work. And a lot of people who were working in the movie had a very cavalier attitude towards it. They were picking up a paycheck. They could care less.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't on board. And over the last 50 years, I've engaged in a lot of different projects and a lot of different startups. And in many situations, when you have more than 100 people involved, you're actually looking at a core crew of 5 to 15 people, and everyone else is some form of deadwood. It's like, in order to get a project to work, you've got to have core people that make the project work, and they can work with these other people that don't have that level of commitment. But it's not a question of being a hero. It's a question of fighting the battle, getting the battle finished, and then whoever the general is, they either won the battle or they lost the battle, but your end held up. Mm-hmm. And that's how I approach that, and how I've approached a lot of other things in my life. It's not about who gets the medal. It's about, is the job done? Did you provide service for what you were paid for?
Wow. That's amazing. That's it. We can all learn from that. And it's just, I that vision of you and Ward matching the spots up on the shark's snout and going over those repair patches to make sure the continuity was perfect. There's a famous photo of you, which I'm going to include in our show notes on our Telegram channel, of you in Verna Field's editing suite, where you're actually looking at the rushes and your eye is actually looking for continuity at that point, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that editing machine, Rick, who is her son, who's sitting at the editing machine, it's like I couldn't see that close.
Okay.
And it was all we had to look at, but it seemed good to me. Okay. And I never really went up there all that much. But I got a very good sense, and Rick had this big box of cut negatives that were not going to be used, and it was full of all these outtakes. And I said, "Hey, could I have one of these, Rick?" And he said, "Nope, everything has to stay in that box, because we may have to go through that box, and we may need to find one frame, so nothing can leave this room." Wow. And he said, "That's absolutely a law. You can't even touch that stuff." So I had picked up one of the things, I just put it back, and I said, "Okay, no problem."
Wow. and they probably did. They needed a lot of extra little pickups and little frames here and there.
A lot of the suspense in the movie, right up to where Verna cut it, I'm sure in the next frame, the shark's mouth tore open.
Wow. That's amazing.
It looks like suspense, but it was probably the last frame they had that worked.
That's fantastic. And see, so the movie was making itself. That's the image that I keep having here. It's just it's really amazing. It's really amazing that you've brought this, that you're bringing this type of insight here to the Jaws obsession. One of the last few things is we talked about Jaws timing in episode 45, where something bad may happen and cause a change, and the result is a better outcome than what was originally planned. Can you give maybe one example where you were directly involved in a problem that happened that caused a change, and the outcome of what appeared in the movie, it actually became better?
See, we had a lot of different sets, micro sets, call them, that were used in the movie. The bicycle scene sign, the Amity Bank sign, the 4th of July parade, Brody's house, things like that. We were supposed to get authorized by Nick Charlanzio, the auditor, every time we had anything ordered or delivered to the boathouse thing, and then the invoices would be submitted and he would pay the bill and all that stuff. But Ward wouldn't have any truck with that. Basically, he knew that all these little things had to be done ahead of time. So he gave me things to do, and then I gave my people things to do. And we had all these little things stashed, most of which had not ever been authorized. And when they had a problem that something wasn't working and they needed a set really quick, like that afternoon or the next morning, Ward and I had the stuff ready. So we got the Teamster truck together, took it there, installed the stuff, and had it ready, and then they continued shooting. So although we didn't change the course of the movie, we kept the things that we could do ready so that the movie could actually be made for what we could anticipate. And it's like trying to anticipate chaos. Good luck with that. It's like a tornado going through a lumberyard, and you think you're going to build a house by tossing a box of nails into it.
So it was the backup plan. It was constantly trying to anticipate the chaos and making a backup plan in case this might happen or this might happen. And you're saying that some people were losing their jobs as it went along. There was a couple of guys on the island that rented the movie lead. They went and bought all the lead on the island, and then they found out that it was going to be needed. So then because they needed it for ballast in both of the boats to do the weight distribution thing, so that the boat would be on the right keel. And so instead of selling them the lead, they rented it to them for a very inexpensive amount of money. But by the time they were done with the movie, it had ended up costing them a fortune. Wow.
So
there was people taking advantage. That's what you're saying.
There were always people trying to take advantage of what was going on. Like Ward was just pulling his hair out because we had to have materials. We had to keep the people that we had working. Sometimes we'd let people go, and then I call them back and ask them if they could come back, and do some other stuff. And, and in life, there's two ways to succeed. One is rules-based, and the other one's relationship-based. A lot of people get by by doing rules. I've always leaned heavily on relationships. Get a lot more done with relationships than you'll ever get done with rules. And on Jaws, there were the rules people who were trying to make everything work for them and their rules, and then there were the relationship people who wanted to get things to work because they were part of a team. And those are entirely two different worlds, and those worlds collided.
Wow, that's an amazing dynamic. That just blew my mind right there. That's I'm going to have to ponder over that. That's an amazing amount of wisdom right there. Wow, that's fantastic.
Well, and when you look at the Zanuck and Brown, that's the money guys. Yeah, and they asked the wrong questions about how things were happening, and they were very nervous about exactly what was going on. But they believed in Ward because they saw what Ward was doing. Right. And at one point, Steven Spielberg came down on his bicycle, and he had one of the first Walkmans I've ever seen. I don't even think it was a Walkman. Somebody got it for him in Japan. Okay. So he was listening to, and he was asking us questions about how's it going and all the rest of the stuff. And, he shook everybody's hand, and, we didn't know who the heck the guy was. He's the same age I am.
Sure.
I am. And,
you were both 26, right? You were both 26?
Yeah, he's 26 years old. He's just a kid. And he's got this Walkman, and he's a pretty cool guy. And,
sure.
We were chatting for a while about how it's all going. But, It's like people would come to the boathouse, and it's Ward used to say, there's no such thing as an innocent visitor. It's like if somebody's coming down here to see where we do the work, you have to be very careful.
I see, yeah. Got to keep a watchful eye out.
Nobody's coming to visit the guys who are doing the work because they want to say hi.
I guess, Marty, that's the thing is what this interview highlights is that there's and I'm going to switch a gear here. What the interview highlights is common everyday folks coming together and doing their part to see a successful outcome. And that was the same principle that your example that you just listed. It was the same principle I used in launching the Book of Quint campaign and writing of the novel, where I believe that it was just, the corporate Hollywood was sitting on their hands, and it was JAWS fans from around the world that came together to make this happen through the Indiegogo campaign. And then also by listening and surrounding the JAWS obsession with support. You have spent time with the Book of Quint, and I was wondering if I could really quick, as we wrap this interview up, get your thoughts on the novel and how it expands the JAWS universe, inspired by the film that you worked so hard on all those years ago.
Well, I'm glad you asked that. Actually, Ryan, I actually do read a lot. I've read an awful lot during my life, and occasionally I will do reviews on Amazon for different books. And basically, if it's not a 5-star review, I won't do it. And what you've done is you've written a 5-star book.
Oh.
And the thing that really is important to me is it's not necessarily about the JAWS universe, but it's about where that book fits on the bookshelf. Because Peter Benchley's book is one thing, and the movie is an entirely different thing.
Right.
And your book, on a standalone basis, is a well-written book. You can read that book never having read Benchley's book and never having seen the movie. And the thing that's really good about it is it's not about the hero of JAWS. It's about the hero with 1,000 faces. Because your book is about the sinking of the Indianapolis. And the people who were on the Indianapolis, if you do any research about them, you'll know that they want that story to never go away. They don't want to talk about it, but they don't want that story to ever go away. And your book does an important part of keeping that story alive so that other people will be interested in it. And if nothing else, and there are several other things, if you don't mind me saying, that are worthwhile in that book, because there's a book that's read by the military in the United States called On Killing, which is, it's a great book, and it's a brilliant book, but I don't recommend anybody read it who doesn't want to have their mind changed about killing. Because if you're going to be a soldier, you have to know that.
Right.
And if you're going to go to sea, and my brother was a seaman for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and eventually ended up as the manager of marine recruitment. And he put a lot of people at sea, and he put several fishermen, friend of mine, at sea for Woods Hole. So the people who go to sea, they know about sharks. If a boat goes down off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, many of those seamen will not put on their survival suits because they're not about to get eaten alive by hammerhead sharks. They'd rather drown. And the Coast Guard won't pick them up off the boat unless they got a survival suit on.
Right.
And they aren't surprised at the number of white sharks that are off the coast, and more so now than ever before, as I'm sure you well know, with Truro and off the southern shore of Martha's Vineyard.
Sure.
There are a lot of sharks, and they're mostly hammerheads. That understanding that, the first part of your book, is really worthwhile, if for no other reason than that.
Wow.
But if you take a look at any library, this book belongs right next to The Old Man and the Sea, Moby Dick, Jack London's seafaring books. If you look at Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis, where Odysseus is on his way back, he's fighting a sea monster. And in order to get through that crisis, he has to feed 6 seamen to the sea monster. And if you think for a second that Quint was not called by the sirens to go to the sea, and if you get past the sirens kill themselves. Mm-hmm. But in Quint's case, he was eaten by the sea monster. So if you take a look at literature and just the story, and I know those waters pretty well. So what you did is you captured that triangle of ocean that would surround Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and Amity, and whatever creative liberties you may have taken, it's only going to add to a good story. The believability in the Book of Quint, it's certainly worth a read. Now, undoubtedly, people are going to have an investment one way or the other in what their opinion is on what you may or may not have chosen to do in the book. And that's all well and good, but how many people who are Star Wars fans have ever read Shakespeare?
Right.
And the thing is, with literature and creativity, when you choose to become a writer of fiction, you create a field. You open a window into a world, and it's your responsibility to make that world, as you see it, as authentic as possible. And there are certain things that I definitely agree with in your book, and other things that, well, maybe I don't agree, maybe I do agree. It doesn't matter, because the thing is, you've painted your story, and that story works.
Wow.
Now, the best thing about quantum mechanics is it provides great metaphors. If you look at the black hole of Quint and the black hole of that story that's peripherally focused on the Indianapolis experience, but also all of literature that involves the sea, like Shackleton's Valiant Voyage, things like that, it's like the James Webb Hubble like photographs that come from space. There's something called gravitational lensing.
Okay.
And if there is a black hole between you and something on the other side of the black hole, you will actually see 5 or 6 different versions of what's on the other side of the black hole, because the light is bending around the black hole.
Right.
And it's kind of a difficult thing, but gravitational lensing is one of the proofs of Einstein's theory of relativity. So what you've got is that black hole opening of creativity, which pulled Peter Benchley in, which pulled Steven Spielberg in, which pulled you in. And as light goes around that event, there are different versions of what's on the other side of that event. And that literally is the JAWS universe.
Oh, man.
Because the actual opening of creativity is solidly there. And that is a really important thing for everyone to understand, in particular younger children who like the story of JAWS. And it's like, I think most people who are JAWS fans knows who Brandon is in England. Mm-hmm. And he's the young JAWS kid. That's Phil Elric's son. And the thing is, that black hole of JAWS, the light bends around it. And that is the story of the JAWS universe. Everyone's got a different take on JAWS, because that black hole bends everybody's imagination around it. And what they see on the other side actually isn't what's on the other side. It's what happened to the light that got bent when they were looking at it.
Oh, man, that's amazing. Marty, I think you just summed up my entire last 29 months of my life. Because
maybe so.
I thought I was going crazy. I literally was. It
doesn't mean you're not crazy. I'll tell you, Ryan. It doesn't mean you're not crazy.
It consumes me. I'm shaking. I can't thank you enough. I'm actually like, it's unbelievable to hear your words about the book in that way. I've never expected that this interview would have produced that someone that was involved with JAWS, and that your take coming from that, and as you read the book, because there was a lot that happened, the pressure and just the images that were coming into the door, like you just described, the door being opened. And it was just, there was a lot of parts of that book I don't remember writing because it was flowing. I just have to say, I try to explain it to people. I don't feel I wrote it. I feel I was given it and I'm just presenting it to the world.
That is the creative process. When you go from nothing, absolutely nothing, to a finished created product that you created, there's more involved than just your effort. It's like, look at Van Gogh.
Yeah.
It's like he could not stop and he never knew what he was doing. It's like, look at Steven Spielberg starting that movie and then leaving Martha's Vineyard just before they blew up the shark head, not knowing if he had a movie, not knowing if he could tell a story. Look at Rick Dreyfuss complaining about it all a month later on live TV, saying that it had ruined his career.
Wow.
And then a year later, you've got a $400 million blockbuster that nobody saw coming.
Wow.
What part of that did Steven Spielberg plan? He almost lost his job and his career.
Unbelievable.
And here it was, all these other people, Verna Fields, John Williams, Rick Fields, Ward Welton, all these people did their job. They didn't expect it would be a $400 million blockbuster and probably never really benefited from it as such. And it's like, and then you come along and you look into the night sky and you see a version of Jaws on the other side of a black hole, and you're not sure what you see because there's 5 versions of it around that black hole, but you know it's on the other side and you want to tell somebody about it. Have at it, my man.
Wow. Thank you so much. Marty Milner, thank you so much. This just made my entire year, and it's only fitting that this is the last show of 2022 of what a hectic year this was for myself and the Jaws obsession and all that. And going into 2023, this is the greatest gift, and I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me here with this interview, for the listeners, but also for your review of the Book of Quint. That just made my year. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Ryan. Have a great day and a happy new year.
Absolutely. You too. A very special thanks and Happy New Year wishes to Marty Milner for his appearance. His words of history, wisdom, and advice mean so much. I'm still at a loss for words after hearing his review of the Book of Quint. From the writing and to the reading, it's been an experience, and now that experience continues with such a review from Marty. That's one of the beautiful results from everything that's happened here over the show and the writing of the bulk of the writing of the book in this past year. Marty Milner is a special soul, and I have had the privilege to reach into his orbit and feel that light. What an amazing journey this has been. And it continues on into 2023. My goal is to make sure every one of you listening has access to the Book of Quint, so you can share in this experience. I will not rest until it is so. I can promise you that. For the latest on what is going on with the Book of Quint, please follow the links in the description of this broadcast. Follow the book on Instagram at Book of Quint, or you can go to JAWSOB.com or bookofquint.com for a list of contacts and news. The official coffee of the Jaws Obsession, the Cracked Bean Roastery in East Syracuse, New York, still has some books for sale over there, and they do ship domestically in the United States. Or you can just go into the shop over there if you're in the city and you can go pick one up. Also, a bag of coffee with the book is not a bad way to kick off this new year. You can find links to the Cracked Bean in the description as well. To all of you out there in the Jaws Obsession, I wish you all a happy new year. We have a lot of work ahead of us in 2023, and episode 51 will be the start. We still are on the Peter Benchley timeline, and that's what we're going to focus on. Thanks for all your support this year and your time in listening to this broadcast. Without you, this would not have been possible. I thank you. And with that, farewell and adieu, and show me the way to go home.